Okay, inshallah, we'll begin now. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم بسم الله الحمد لله الصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to Islamic Parenting 101. Today's topic, as advertised, is prevent and its impact on parenting. So in today's show, we've got a guest speaker on with us, who is Brother Muhammad Rabbani. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, inshallah. Just a quick introduction to Brother Rabbani, who he is the managing director of Cage. And Cage, if you're not aware, are an organization who advocate for due process, the rule of law, and the end to the injustices of the war on terror. And Cage are quite familiar with this topic of prevent, and they've published several reports on prevent, and with the most recent, from what I've seen, published in January, entitled Beyond Prevent. And so, inshallah, today's session will hopefully be a bit interactive. If you do have any questions, please do use the chat function, the Q&A function on the webinar. Inshallah, we'll pick up those questions at the end, or if necessary through the program. Those who are joining, again, you can join via Zoom, and also it's sort of streaming live on Facebook as well, so you can join via there and tune in as well. So inshallah, we'll start just with the question really to yourself, Brother Rabbani, which is for those who may not be aware, and I think it'd be good to have just it's just a bit more background about prevent. So background, a brief summary. So more like when did it start, why, and what was its purpose really?
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa wala. So firstly, thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and join you here today and talk about prevent, which I think a lot of parents are concerned about. There's been a lot of media attention around prevent, and also lots of concerns and confusion about what it does and what it can do. So partly, inshallah, today I intend to try and inshallah demystify some of those things based on our practical experiences and the research that we've been conducting as an organization for over 10, 12 years now on prevent. So what is prevent? Prevent is part of the counter-terrorism strategy of the UK government. It has 4 strands. There's a strand called protect, pursue, prepare, and prevent. And all of them are designed to counter what the government calls the threat from terrorism. Prevent was introduced secretly from 2003, but it became very much open public policy from 2005 after the 7/7 attacks. And since then, it's been going through different kind of iterations and forms. And what it intends to do, the creators of Prevent, they say that it's designed to stop people from becoming terrorists. And that's, in a nutshell, what it tries to do. Lots of controversy about whether it actually succeeds in doing that. The evidence, in our opinion, is overwhelming to show that prevent actually does the exact opposite. It doesn't actually succeed in preventing people from political violence. It often exacerbates the problem and disenfranchises people. So inshallah, we can go into all of that in today's discussion, inshallah.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, that was a good brief intro. I think it's important because even before this show, I've seen some discussions and comments with people who've been kind of talking about prevent, and there's a kind of maybe a mixed opinion maybe in regards to event, even within the Muslim community. So the question is, like, I really want to go into what is the problem with prevent. Why is a problem for Muslims really, and obviously from our perspective, we're looking at parents more so. So what is the real problem with it?
Okay, I mean, prevent has a series of problems with it, but I'll get to the nub of it. Firstly, it operates on a basis called pre-crime. What that means is before people have even committed a crime, prevent tries to go and catch those people. So you can immediately see the kind of irrational and dangerous logic behind this, and how, if it's put into the hands of people who are who want to abuse that, they can abuse it in a big way. So just to give you an example, 2015 to 2016. 2015 was when Prevent was made a public duty for public institutions to actually implement, including schools, for example, which we're going to talk about, right? So 2015 to 2016, 7,631 referrals were made to Prevent. And a quarter of these, of the 7,000, were children under 15. In 2017, the 6,093 individuals were referred to Prevent. 2,000 of these were under 15. So it was increasing within a year. The number of referrals were increasing. So remember, if you go back to what is Prevent trying to do, Prevent is trying to stop people from becoming terrorists. So just obvious question, how do you know a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old is going to become a terrorist? So this is the biggest problem with Prevent. It's based on a completely irrational logic and works on the premise, some of the viewers, parents at home who are watching, maybe you'll be, you may be familiar with a Hollywood movie called Minority Report, which actually works on the same premise. The police go after people who they predict will carry out crimes in the future. And you can imagine, you know, innocent people are rounded up and criminalized and so on. So that's number one. Number two, the second problem with it is it uses some concepts and ideas, words that you and I have now become very familiar with because it's always discussed when talking about Muslims in this country. Words such as radicalization or extremism. And we kind of just, you know, take it as though it is a thing. But if you actually study and unpack these words, you realize that there aren't any agreed definitions. In fact, if you ask a lawyer, tell me under the law, what does extremism mean? A lawyer will not be able to answer you. Ask a judge, what is the meaning of extremism? Or what is the meaning of radicalization? They will not be able to adequately answer you. And in fact, it's not even, the government has struggled to pass laws which actually criminalize extremism. So what they've done is they passed these policies which are managed by Home Office staff and not by independent judges or lawyers. And so that's the second problem. It relies on these concepts which are very fluid, loose. And again, if in the wrong hands, they can be abused. They can be used to actually target particular communities. And the Muslim communities have, for the last decade, basically been kind of targeted with this policy. The third thing, and I'll finish with that, the third major problem with it is there is no actual proof that Prevent works. And there's no study or research that actually documents that it works. What you hear from public officials who are paid by Prevent to say these things, they say that, you know, Prevent is working, Prevent is doing this. But actually, if you research into the studies that document and evaluate the performance of Prevent, you'll find that it doesn't actually work. What is worse, Cage did an investigation, and inshallah we can share the links to these with the attendees today. It's called, which we looked into the underlying science, alleged science behind Prevent. And it's based on 22 indicators, which indicate if a person is an extremist or not. And if you read our report, we've documented there's just a shocking reality of it. That study was done on a handful of prisoners inside a UK prison. And the psychologists who did the study, they even said that this is an experiment and we can't really draw any conclusions. But the government took that study, which was done on a small group of prisoners, and then they rolled it out across the entire UK, taking the experimental results of that study and applying it into government policy. Okay, so 3 million people, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's probably gone up. 3 million public sector workers have been trained on these 22 so-called indicators of extremism, when in fact it's based on nothing, right? So in a nutshell, that's the problem with Prevent, amongst many other problems, of course.
Recently, maybe, I don't know, I wouldn't say recently, it's been a while, the phrase has been used or attributed to Prevent as in toxic. So again, what is this what you're referring to in terms of the problems with Prevent, that what makes it toxic? Also, it seems to slowly be a kind of momentum kind of building against Prevent from many different angles, not just private sector, public sector. And so again, just if you want to elaborate a bit about that, just to see what.
Yeah, this has become known as toxic because of all the controversies around Prevent. Many people have realized. I must say, in the early days, when we go to 2007, 8, 9, it was a bit unclear. It was a new policy, and many, even members from the Muslim community, very naively participated in Prevent, because Prevent is one thing you got to give it to them. They were very good at PR and persuading people that it's a good thing. But alhamdulillah, through the efforts of organizations like Cage and others, I mean, Cage's first report on Prevent was, I think, 2009, if I'm not mistaken. From that day, from that point, we've been documenting the dangers of Prevent and, putting it out there in the public domain, using evidence, and then asking questions. And the more that we poked into the problems of Prevent, the more the public became aware that actually this policy is not what it's presented to be. And you had many scandals being uncovered. Quick examples, one was that Prevent was being used to actually manage perceptions of Muslim community organizations, purporting to be genuine grassroots organizations, but actually they were being controlled secretly by Home Office officials. There's public officials such as the UN, head of the National Union of Teachers, so many public bodies that when they looked at Prevent and what it was asking them to do, they realized that this is not actually about stopping terrorism. This was outsourcing the responsibility of surveillance and spying onto public sector workers. So public statements started coming out that actually this is a major problem. In 2015, if I'm not mistaken, we contacted academics and asked them to look at Prevent and its problems. And we put together a statement from Cage. And alhamdulillah, I think we had something like 300 signatories signing up to that statement, all warning and calling the society to stop dealing with Prevent because it is very, very dangerous. I would like to think, and Allah knows best, if this effort wasn't made and Prevent became very, very entrenched within society, I think we would have sleepwalked into a very, very, dark place. I honestly think that, because Prevent opens up the doors for huge amounts of surveillance and encroachment into the private lives and thinking of ordinary people. As Muslims, we should be concerned about that because we should have the freedom to believe what we like, freedom to think what we like, freedom to practice our religion without being constantly cast as a security threat, which is what Prevent does. And as we'll talk about today, it does that even with kids, now literal 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds. So that's why it became known as a toxic policy by the end. By the end, it took a few years for that to catch on, but alhamdulillah, I think it's become very widespread now.
Okay, alhamdulillah. So kind of we've alluded to it a lot, so maybe let's just start kind of diving in. Since 2015, when it kind of became a public sector duty, or the Prevent duty as it's known as, it's obviously impacted now on parents. So looking at from the children's perspective, from the top of my head, I can think of obviously two, which is schools and doctors. I'm not sure if there's any more. So maybe if you can kind of go into it, the impact now this is having on basically parents, and we'll come on later on to the ability to kind of parent and to raise the children Islamically. But how has it impacted parents?
So I think from a little bit about how Cage works in this area and how we've come to learn about what Prevent involves. Our experience is not only are we studying the policy and closely following the developments, and we are documenting it, and we are analyzing it, and then we are, in the public interest, publishing information. Secondly, what we're also doing is we're working directly with individuals and the families, parents, as well as families who have been affected by Prevent, and we've been documenting their cases, trying to secure assistance from them. So each year we've got dozens of people who contact us, and therefore we've got an insight into how Prevent actually impacts families. So perhaps what might be useful, with your permission, I'll just share a few slides that I prepared, and I could cover some of these things.
Yeah, that'd be great, inshallah. Go ahead.
All right. Okay, so let me just quickly see if I can make this work. Bismillah. So let me know if you can see that.
Yep, it's clear.
Okay, khair. So I was going to cover some of the myths, first of all, just to set the scene, because we have to accept that Prevent is in the public domain and Muslims are worried about it, and there's a lot of things that have been said about Prevent. What does the government say about Prevent? I picked on 2-3 points that I want to just cover. So one of the things that the government says that Prevent is there to do is safeguard children. And they keep repeating this line that it's about safeguarding. It's about safeguarding, that we're here to safeguard. I mean, when you hear something and you hear it again and again and again, you start to associate that, in your mind. And it's a very deliberate tool of deception that the government uses, because Prevent is not really there to safeguard. Firstly, police are involved almost from the beginning of the process. Now, if you look at anybody who's in the audience that is a teacher or a social worker or a youth worker, you will know that when you're talking about child protection and safeguarding matters, police don't get involved straight up from the beginning. There's a whole process that the professional who's responsible will be going through. But in the case of Prevent, it straight away becomes, or very early on, it becomes a police matter. You have counterterrorism police getting involved, asking questions, even speaking to kids and asking them questions. So this is one problem. Secondly, the kind of measures that Prevent then uses, they are, on the one hand, safeguarding, but on the other hand, they're also criminalizing. People who get stopped under Prevent, their names, not stopped, or they get referred under Prevent, their names or their data is then shared with other government agencies. For example, there's an agency called the Extremism Analysis Unit that the Home Office manages. And there's obviously agencies such as Border Police and others. And what we've seen is that this information sharing can then lead to negative impacts for people elsewhere. Like you might start being asked questions at the airport if you happen to have a file on you by Prevent, and vice versa. So there's not a lot of transparency around this, and we've repeatedly requested the government to actually become transparent and provide the data and explain how a person who's been referred to any of these kind of databases can remove themselves from them. And lastly, remember, you're not, when Prevent says that it's about safeguarding, we should always remember that when there's the law or police or others involved, the presumption has to be about that the person is innocent. And so long as they're not committing a crime, they should be left alone. Now, this logic, everybody applies in any other context in life, but Prevent doesn't work on that. It starts on the basis that you are a potential terrorist, and we have to intervene to safeguard you, your family, the whole society from you becoming a terrorist. So this is one major myth that is peddled by Prevent practitioners, people who are on the payroll of Prevent. So beware of that. Secondly, they repeat, and this is a technically correct statement, that Prevent is voluntary and you don't have to actually engage. But through our experience in working with parents and individuals who have been engaged by Prevent, it doesn't feel that way at all. The parent will be made to feel that if I don't turn up to the meeting or if I don't answer the questions right now, then I may become separated from my kids, or I may end up with a referral to the social services, or worse still, I might get arrested. Because an ordinary person has police officers from Counterterrorism Command coming and asking questions. You straight away think that I've got to comply. If I don't comply, I might harm myself. But actually, the truth of the matter is that it is voluntary. And, so this is another thing that we need to keep in mind about Prevent. A third claim that Prevent is working. You'll see politicians always repeating this, that Prevent is working. And that is also another myth. One of the important statistics to keep in mind, I mentioned earlier on thousands of kids who are referred to Prevent by their own teachers or maybe their doctors. But the reality is 95% of those referrals are actually then cancelled. So they don't actually go all the way involving social services, for example, or child protection. Because somewhere along the line, people realize that, hold on a second, this is ridiculous. I mean, this is just kids being kids. And so now can you imagine? A child has been put through that traumatic experience. A family has been dragged through that experience as well. A school, a teacher has been placed under pressure to start referring kids that they think in their mind could become terrorists. But then at the end of the road, it's actually crossed up and said, actually, there is no risk here. So what does that mean? That means Prevent is harming and damaging so many innocent people, kids included. And that means Prevent is not working as politicians would like you to believe. Okay. The other thing is, as you can see, the Reading terror attack, which has been described as a terror attack, just happened the other day. It turns out that the man who carried out that attack was on the Prevent program. So, I mean, that says it all. There are major incidents and attacks where people who have had difficult pasts or mental health problems end up knifing people on the street. And turns out that they were actually referred to the Prevent program. So Prevent is not working. Right. So let's look at the, if I can move on to what can I expect to happen as a parent. There's a few things in terms of how it all typically happens. So when you're at school, you may get contacted by a teacher who has concerns about your child. Then what may happen is those concerns are then taken up through, and by this time they may have already interviewed your child. They may have done that without your permission. Or maybe they haven't done that, and they'll contact you and then they'll ask for your permission. The school will then investigate whatever the concern is. And the concern is about, inevitably that this child might be on their way to getting radicalized, and they are vulnerable. These words are used, that they are vulnerable, they are at risk. Okay, but at risk of what? Like at risk of doing what? Like a child has said some words or has had a fight at school. I'll give you some examples just to illustrate that. So then the school will investigate and they'll try and make an assessment. That assessment will involve various people. There'll be some teachers, there'll be some designated Prevent person who's at the school. Now, different schools have different kind of ways of handling this. Not every single school has a Prevent safeguarding officer. And then it may involve just normal safeguarding people, like teachers who are designated safeguarding officers, who now find themselves in a position that actually they need to watch out for kids who are becoming radical. Now, if this then escalates, then social services may get involved. Okay, but that's actually quite rare, but it may happen, and it may even go further than that. But so just to illustrate a few examples, some of these are in the public domain, so you can read about them yourself. So in a famous example of a child who went to school, was asked to make a presentation, and the child actually made that presentation, and he was talking about what he read about and researched about environmental activists. And don't forget, we are living in the era of Extinction Rebellion and climate change and everything. And in the course of describing what these activists were doing, he he described them as eco warriors who were in the business of saving trees and saving the earth. And and he's described them as, some people see them as eco-terrorists. So, and then he continued the story. Now, because he mentioned the word terrorist in his presentation describing climate change activists, the teacher got alarmed and flagged this, and then eventually this led to escalation, and then safeguarding people became involved, and the child was eventually sat down and interrogated about his views and beliefs. And several questions were asked. One of them was, do you have any affiliation with ISIS? And in the description that he gave, he talked about chainsaws, obviously chopping trees, and how that's terrible and so on. And he was asked, do the chainsaws actually explode? So the entire logic of approaching this child, just because in a presentation that had nothing to do with terrorism, he mentioned the word terrorist, and guess what? Of course, the child was a Muslim child. So straight away, teachers who had been conditioned over years to associate Muslim with terrorism, that prejudice, that bias kicked in, and then they made a referral. And in this particular case, the parents were not involved. They were not allowed to be, they just weren't involved. So even the questioning that took place, it happened without the knowledge of the parents. There were people who were questioning the child that were not staff. So you have to look at it from the perspective of a child. The child is now being questioned formally by individuals who he's never met, who are not from the staff of the school. And in the course of his questioning, he was made to believe that if he gets the answers wrong, he could be separated from his family. So this is it's a sort of a more of an extreme case, but the point being that Prevent has granted enough power to officials, especially police, to actually get away with doing this. But it's not what happens all the time. Okay, next case involved an 8-year-old child who came to school, and I don't know, maybe you guys have actually seen this, maybe a t-shirt which had the words, "I want to be like Abu Bakr as-Siddiq." So alhamdulillah, obviously all Muslim parents would love to see that and promote that, and it's a beautiful thing. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, who is the best man in our ummah after the prophets, he has the greatest station. So every parent would love to see their child emulating and aspiring to be like that. But guess what happened in this case? The teachers, for some reason, okay, to us Muslims, it just seems absolutely berserk. But again, they made knee-jerk association. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, his name is familiar or similar to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. And that's how, crazy it is. So the teachers started to got police involved, referred it to Prevent, and then the child was questioned, interrogated. Imagine an 8-year-old child being interrogated about ISIS. Do you have any involvement in ISIS? Are you connected with them? And then he was also interrogated about his beliefs as a Muslim. Things like, do you believe that Christians are going to go to hell when they die? And that just also is a reminder that Prevent, they say it's about terrorism, but then you will see that what they're trying to do is determine how religiously committed even a child is. The playground banter case involved a 5-year-old child who was playing with his friends in the school playground. And one of the things that they were arguing about was whether Trump is a good guy or a bad guy. So they were the argument actually got a bit heated. 5-year-olds, remember, 5-year-olds, and it was a teacher got involved, and then each sort of side in the argument were complaining to the teacher about what happened and trying to get the teacher to back them. So one side was saying that Trump is a bad man. So the teacher asked why. and the child explained that because he bans Muslims from going to America. And the other side were arguing something different. So a fight had broken out, basically. And again, remember, 5-year-olds in the playground having an argument, even fighting. I mean, it's kids, right? And it's playground stuff. But this then got escalated. Prevent officers got involved in the school. It went to the headmaster. They got involved. And then the parents were called in until it went all the way to social services being involved in the case, visiting the parents at home, questioning the parents, questioning the kids. And, so it escalated all the way. That 5-year-old child was actually my son. So I'm telling you from my personal experience how Prevent can get involved and what Prevent can do to you, and by the way, if anybody's wondering, I was not the one who told my son that that Trump is a bad guy. We all know he's a bad guy, right? But the point was, I never told him about the Muslim ban. BBC told him about the Muslim ban, and CNN told him about the Muslim ban, and all of his other mates told him about Muslim ban. I mean, my son's not hating on Trump. Trump's hating on the Muslims. That's the reality. So, but look at the impact. Look at how much, how the environment that Prevent has created for Muslims in schools. Okay, so perhaps should I pause there? Maybe perhaps, Brother Norden. Maybe we can take a few questions, and then I can finish off just by talking about how to deal with Prevent if you ever come into contact with it.
Okay. Alhamdulillah, a lot of you have answered one of the questions I would have had, which is regarding some case studies. It's important to obviously relate how it does impact on parents and parenting. The thing that that is a concern for parents, and there's a couple of things we discussed a couple of weeks ago regarding the kind of relationship and sex education that's coming into schools and concerns parents had regarding that, because obviously there'll be certain teachings that are against Islamic values, and if a child was to express certain values, how would that be perceived, and prevents intervention within that. And that links on to the wider question, which is some parents are very worried, and it's almost becoming like, is there something we really should be worried about? Are we fear-mongering, or how do we kind of get over that? Because I'm getting to the point, which is there something between like where we have a private Islam and a public Islam, where parents might be teaching the children something at home, but then saying, oh, when you go to school, don't say anything, out of fear of Prevent, of being escalated to social services, and so on and so on. And how can we actually overcome that? What's the balance?
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. Absolutely. It's probably the most important question in my opinion, because it's to do with the psychology of Muslims and how they choose to see themselves. It's without doubt the Prevent and all the other anti-terror laws and policies that have been created have had an effect on the Muslim psyche in Britain. We have to accept that. Add to that the constant media demonization, constant focus on Muslims. Naturally, there is going to be an effect. And what we have to do is really sort of look beyond the emotional response and think about, actually what is the harm, not focus on, what is the potential or perceived harm. Okay, so that will be one of my points, that there is fear and then there is irrational fear. And we have to be careful. We have to first accept that having the fear response is a very human thing. Obviously, our detractors and powerful oppressors, what they do, they know that as well. So they know how to activate the natural human fear response. Okay, so that part is a given, and all human beings will feel fear. But we have to also recognize that within fear, there's another element, which is irrational fear. And what that means is there's things that we speculate on that is not based on fact. It's based on suggestion, speculation, which make us afraid more than actually what we are meant to be. So that would be my advice. That actually what we have to be wary of is check that we aren't falling for the propaganda, falling for all the fear-mongering, scaremongering. Then actually the enemy will win, because they would then end up creating an environment where we, the Muslim community, will end up self-policing our own thoughts, behaviors, decisions, even though actually, legally speaking, we have a lot of space to express our deen, to express our, parenting. We actually have a lot of legal space. We have the freedom of expression, freedom of religion. So I think that's the balance. I don't know if that was clear, but I just wanted to acknowledge that there is a genuine fear. That's understandable, but we shouldn't fall for the propaganda, which is designed to actually create a psyche within our minds where we start controlling what we say, controlling what we do, out of a potential fear that maybe one day this and that will happen. So I would be very worried if Muslim parents start to police and censor their thinking, their words, and their behavior with their kids out of that potential fear, you know?
Inshallah. I think that is a very difficult balance. I think a lot of parents are struggling with to overcome. I put it into a bit of a harsh question, which would be a lot of people can say, what Cage are doing, your fear mongering or your scaremongering regarding prevent, and that's actually not helping the situation. So again, how would you answer that?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a fair question. It's a fair question. In fact, that's what the Daily Mail says. All right. So the Daily Mail was actually wrong, because the Daily Mail said in 2016 that Cage is scaremongering, saying that saying that Prevent is going to come and take your kids away. Right. So 2019, we published a report, and inshallah I can share the link with you, that documents actual cases of families where Prevent has directly intervened to try and take the kids away. Right. So in a factual sense, we're not scaremongering. We're simply telling the truth. We're documenting everything and we're telling the truth. Now, what makes it tricky for us, even as an organization that is witnessing and trying to publish material which is in the public interest, what makes it tricky for us is that the psychological impact on the community through constant demonization through the media and political establishment has created an environment where Muslims do feel fear. Right? We're very aware of that, and we have a separate strategy to try and counter that. We have, discussions like this, for example, where we can go into, what the law says and go into what the policy says, and then also talk about examples and put things into proportion. That yes, there are those few examples that are shock and horror cases, but in the majority of cases, there isn't a drastic kind of outcome at the end. So we're not scaremongering in that sense. We're trying to empower our community through information, and that information, if it's understood in the correct way, then the Muslim community will be in a better position than taking a view that we don't want to learn about it. We'd rather keep our heads in the sand, and we'd rather not rock the boat, and somehow everything will be okay. I think that would be very, very dangerous.
Okay, inshallah. There's probably a comment or maybe a question you can say that's coming as well. I can see it doesn't Prevent operate on the same principle of as the pharaoh, as he intervened between the parent and their child.
Yeah. That's it's a remark that many have made, and one of my colleagues, brother Dr. Asim Qureshi, he published a book in which he makes parallels between the Pharaonic way of governing and the similar, very, very similar attitudes in the policy making that takes place within Britain, especially when it comes to ruling minorities. So this idea of targeting children, separating them from families, or even if they're not doing that to many kids, the fear is there. The fear has been created that could happen to me, right? And that's it. And then the trick is complete. See, once you've tricked people into thinking that my son or my daughter is going to be taken away from me, what do you think a parent's going to think? So our advice is that's not entirely true. That's not true, actually. That's not going to happen to everybody. It will happen in some small number of cases. So our advice to the Muslim community is don't get overly afraid. Learn, find out the law, know your rights, and have always a positive, self-confident approach. But our message to the government is that should not happen even to one person. It's wrong. Even if it happens to one person where a child is being targeted based on this logic of prevent, it is wrong. And that entire policy should go to bin. So do you see, like it's both. Like we must say to the government that what you're doing is wrong, even if it happens to a handful, but we must also empower the community and say that it's not going to happen to you. You know, in most cases, what will happen is teacher will come along, raise some concerns, have a conversation. And if at that point you're clear, you're confident, and I'll just go through a few points in a minute, so I've got a couple of more slides, then you can actually go through that process and come out of it without any problem, inshallah.
You kind of touched upon it, and before we kind of go into the slides, and there are some more questions coming in, but you touched upon kind of knowing about your rights, and you discussed before about how sometimes or some cases children are being kind of spoken to by teachers without the knowledge of the parents, or even outside people outside of the school. So is there anything you can kind of give us information regarding what are the rights that parents do have in this kind of situation?
The situation of where the child is being spoken to without parental consent.
Yeah.
I mean, firstly, that's not allowed. So that's straight up, like, you know, that's what every parent needs to know. That if there's going to be professionals other than the actual teacher themselves, because the teachers, they're teaching the kids, if there's any type of discussion that takes place outside of that teaching environment and it's involving any other adult that is not the teacher, then the parent has the right to know that. And if the parent doesn't consent, then that's not going to happen. Just make a little sort of a caveat that if it's social services, that's a slightly different matter. But if it's every parent has the right to know and be involved in and present in discussion, any conversation that takes place with an adult. So often parents don't know that, and often schools will maybe unknowingly, maybe maliciously, maybe just because of saving time, they'll just do that. Okay, so that's an example. Maybe if I just go into some of those points very briefly, and I can cover that. So, what do you do if Prevent does get involved, and what does it look like? So, firstly, the first thing to remember is that Prevent, any staff or officer who's at school or outside of school that is from Prevent, you don't have to engage with them. It's completely voluntary. And I mentioned the point earlier on that they kind of use that to their advantage. So they say it's voluntary with their words, but they make you feel as though you must engage. So we call that, you know, it's a coercive type of relationship, that if you don't engage, there will be some adverse consequences. You're made to believe that. So the first things first, you have to remember that engaging with Prevent is absolutely voluntary. If you say, I do not want to talk to you, nobody can do anything. You as a parent have that right, and you can exercise that right. You can say, you know, thanks for your concern, but I'm going to get back to you. Give me your number. Or you can say, you know, I don't want to meet you, or I want to consult a professional or a solicitor before I talk to you. So now, if that's for you, can you imagine now for a child? So that's the first thing to establish very clearly. The second thing is, if that escalates for some reason or for some other aggravating factor, and social services are involved, okay, now that's different, and engagement is required, okay, and that doesn't happen in all the cases. It's very, very rare, okay. Social services are there, and they have very extensive powers and kind of knowledge in terms of protecting children from harm. So that's a completely separate kind of discussion. And as I say, before it goes there, you would have ample notice and information to make an informed kind of decision about how to deal with that. So that's the first point. The second thing is just a set of things actually altogether. If there is a teacher comes to you, or you're contacted and they speak to you and say that we are making a prevent referral, or we have concerns about your child and they might be at risk of radicalization and so on, just a few pointers to keep in mind. Number one is you've got to stay calm. You've got to make sure that you don't start panicking. Okay, this is where, as I said earlier on, the kind of traumatic experience of seeing Muslims constantly demonized in the media, you have to be aware of that response. And what you have to do, you have to kind of slow it down and think rationally and objectively, and not start speculating. Just because a teacher is speaking to you does not mean that it's going to escalate all the way and then my kid's going to be taken from me and all of these. You see, Shaitan works on that basis, isn't it? Shaitan will be there trying to make you afraid. So the first most important thing is stay calm. Nothing has happened. It's just a conversation you're having with the teacher, and you're a professional, they're a professional, you're an adult, they're an adult, and you can handle yourself. Number one. Number two, make eye contact. It's part of being calm and confident. Number three is very crucial. Ask questions. Okay, I know they've contacted you to talk to you or ask you things, but you have to remember that you have the right to say whatever you think is right, because this is your child. So you have to ask questions. You have to ask questions, whatever you want. But just some examples of what you could ask. You could say things like, under what grounds are you, questioning my child? Or for what reasons have you opened up this concern or investigation? You can ask, who is going to be present in this meeting that you want to have with my child? I want to know their names. I want to know why they're going to be there. What are the allegations, alleged things that my child has done or said? You can ask them, like, up to now, have you actually questioned my child in my absence? I want to know who, when, why. If there's been a decision to refer him, tell me the names of those people who were involved in making that decision. I want to know the facts. You can ask them as much as you like. Until you're satisfied, it is your absolute right. Fourth point, very important that you record and keep receipts. Right? Record everything and get things in writing. All right. Ask them to send you any concerns that they raise with you in person or on the phone. Do not accept that is enough. Like, don't go away from that conversation or that phone call without making sure that you make an effort to get things in writing. If they don't give you things in writing, let's say you have a conversation with a teacher or a head teacher or a professional, you put it in writing and send it to them. Ask them for their email, ask them for any other written like postal address, and however you want to communicate, send them your version of the conversation and put it in record. Right? This is absolutely very important. And whenever we've seen some difficulties encountered, one of the easy ways to have avoided those difficulties for those parents is to actually write things down, because these prevent people, they will bend the rules and they will try and get you to commit to things, and they'll make sure that they do it in such a way that you can't catch them because it's not written down. Okay, so that's very, very important. Next point is always have confidence. Always remind yourself, I'm not being accused of actually committing a crime. There is no suggestion that I've been involved in any kind of criminal activity. These prevent people, they don't operate on that basis. Remember, if there was actual criminal activity, you'd have police officers coming and arresting you. So clearly it's nothing to do with that. Like, these prevent people, they've just been given a job to look at what I think, what I believe, what I say, and the entire policy is wrong. So have confidence in yourself. Most likely you're in the right completely, and they're in the wrong. Okay, remember that 95% figure I mentioned? 95% of the referrals to prevent are false. So you should remind yourself, I'm from those 95%. Okay? So clearly they've got it wrong and it's going to soon come out. You should have that confidence. And then finally, if you've done, inshallah, kept your cool, asked the right questions, recorded everything, you should not stop there. You should hold them to account. you should make sure that you take this up with relevant authorities and you complain and you make an issue. You know, it's very, very important, because that is not just good for you, it's good for all the other parents who would have had a problem with Prevent. So last couple of points, and I'll finish, is, so I've made the point about, write everything down. Contact Cage. We have been, alhamdulillah, able to support people who have had Prevent problems for many years now. So alhamdulillah, we've got some experience in dealing with these things. And part of the, I think, in my experience, maybe 60, 70%, maybe more, is not actually the emails and the solicitors and all the rest. It's actually giving parents the confidence and the psychological tools and the intellectual tools to be able to lift themselves up and to fight their own battles. That's actually even more important. And Cage can do that, inshallah, for you. We have a team of caseworkers that have specialist knowledge in this thing. Then thirdly is tell your story. This is something I request of all parents. If you can, think about your child, but also think about the future. Think about other children. If you actually speak out, then you are making that small little ripple effect that will bring the change until it becomes so powerful that Prevent will have to go. Okay, so we I know that not everybody will be ready to do that, and that's understandable. But we do advise parents to come forward and tell your story. Give confidence to the rest of the Muslims. Show up Prevent for what it really, really is. And ultimately, obviously, we would love for people to join the campaign to end Prevent. It's our belief that Prevent is going to end. Trust me, it's going to end, inshallah, very soon. And at that point, inshallah, it will seem as though like it's the most obvious thing to happen. But we believe as Muslims that most of the reward will be taken by the people who were there in the beginning of the struggle. So may Allah give us tawfiq, inshallah. I think that's most of what I had to say, Brother Nouri. I've got some links there that I think I'll definitely recommend parents to download and read, just to get a bit more information, become a bit more aware and educated about Prevent, so that we're not going just by headlines, we're actually going by knowledge and evidence.
Okay, Jazakallah khair for that, inshallah. So we'll move on to some Q&As from the participants, inshallah, or the attendees. So feel free to use the Q&A, inshallah, to ask any questions. So the first one that I've got is it's kind of a question, I guess, slash comment, which was the last point you mentioned regarding join the campaign to end Prevent.
Yeah.
And there's a point here saying that, community needs grassroots mobilization to get behind an organization or a movement in order for our voices to be heard collectively in order to end Prevent. So just any points you want to, I guess that's more of a statement than a question.
Yeah, sure. And that's a very good statement. And that's actually how all of these things come about, largely. The work against Prevent has to happen in different sectors. The community is a very crucial part of that. Cage's strategy to actually bring down Prevent, we've always, if I can just show you one slide very quickly, we've always advocated for the abolition of Prevent, and we've thought this through in detail. And just went there. If you just look through those points, we've thought this through in detail. We believe that it will be not just beneficial for Muslims and the kids who are being criminalized through Prevent, but it will be good for the whole of society to get rid of Prevent. And our position is it has to go, because it is creating all these harms. And guess what? When Prevent didn't exist, these problems, alleged problems, did exist in British society, and the government and society were able to tackle them. Okay, like quickly, just I don't want to divert too much, but if I can say, if I just quickly make an example, in the 20 years since this focus on Muslims being terrorists, how many people have died from terrorism? I mean, you can put in the chat if you know the answer, but I'll just tell you to keep it brief. It's around, it's less than 100. Less than 100 people have died in Britain from, I mean, it's 100 and something figure. But if you compare the previous 20 years when there was no Muslim focus on Muslim terrorism, it was Irish Republican terrorism. More than 3,000 people have been killed in Britain. All right. Now, the question is, did the government roll out a prevent strategy for all the Irish people, which would focus on their Christian beliefs, their religiosity and their commitment to their deen? They didn't, right? And there was clear sense in that. So how come this logic is now being applied to Muslims? Okay. So just to conclude by saying that the movement against prevent is very crucial. It has ripple effects in other areas such as surveillance, such as the relationship between the state and citizens, and how for that to be more fair. So I encourage all of our community for sure to lend their support.
Another question here, maybe you touched upon it, but to elaborate a bit more. With regard to the cases of those who are from, say, East London or Tower Hamlets, of the girls from Bethnal Green who went to Syria, some Muslims say that, if prevent was involved, or if it was properly kind of implemented, then it would have prevented these girls from going. What's the response for that?
Yeah, I think the thing that has to be said is that that's a question to the government and the police authorities who failed to stop those kids. Why did they stop? Why did they still go? Prevent was involved. Prevent has been around since, remember, 2003. So 2005 it became public, but it's been around. The question to ask is Salman al-Abidi, who ended up killing all those people in Manchester. What happened? Even this Sadallah guy, all of them seem to have been involved in prevent. So fine, like I don't support prevent even for those people, but let's say prevent existed. Why did it fail to stop those people? So where is it actually stopping people? That's a big question mark. Secondly, why does it have to absolutely destroy the lives of thousands of other people who then it confirms that we were 95% false positives? Why? How is that right? How is it right to drag an entire community of people, terrorize them, traumatize the kids, put their names on databases, which you don't have any control where those names are going, only to try and get that one or two guys, which the police have failed even to get in the beginning? So that's why we need to oppose prevent from a principle position, but also practically, it's a failure.
Okay. Another question here is just: is it free for parents to ask for help from Cage?
Yeah, it's totally free. We've never ever charged for any of this advice or services that we provide to the community. Since the day Cage was created, we never charge for any of our support.
Okay, alhamdulillah. Another couple of questions, and we'll look to wrap it up, inshallah. Has anything been done to influence local MPs to ensure they can be our voices, e.g., where there is a large minority of Muslims in that community?
Yes, and it's been very disappointing. Remember, always keep the timeline in mind. It's very, very important. You have to think 2003, and we're now in 2020, isn't it? 17 years. So now I'd encourage all the brothers and sisters listening, go online and see which MPs have actually taken a position against prevent. Okay, you know about prevent maybe because it's coming to your radar or you've been talking about it, but an MP who's your representative, who knows the law, who is part of actually bringing about this law, who is part of voting for these policies and bringing them in, knows prevent even better than you do. It's not your job to educate your MP, but let's say, what have the Muslims been doing for the last 17 years then? Many of these MPs and politicians have been asked to take a stand against prevent. But to my knowledge, very, very few have actually done that. Notable examples are from the Green Party, yeah? And most recently, the Liberal Democrats have put out some statements against prevent. And I just want to make a distinction that when prevent was actually causing most of the damage in our community in the early years, most of the politicians did not support the efforts to actually scrutinize prevent. But once the narrative started to be created in public that prevent is a bad thing and is harmful to Muslims and harmful to society in general, then slowly politicians started to find it more comfortable to start raising questions about prevent. So where I'm making this point is just to recognize that, yes, we need to continue lobbying all public officials to do their job, but also to realize that most of them are very they'll always wait to see what the public narrative is on the issue, and they wouldn't never want to stand out from that discussion. So basically concentrate your efforts on promoting the correct narrative, putting all of that into the public domain with evidence, and that will then pressure these politicians and MPs.
Okay, inshallah.
There's a related question about why there's been, so I can just quickly touch, there's been so little support because it was not politically incentivized to actually speak on behalf of fairness for Muslims. That's the truth of the matter. What I mean by that is there was no political incentive for a politician to stand up 1 month before election and say, please vote for me. I'm going to make it very fair for Muslims, and I want equal treatment for all Muslims in the society. You tell me, those brothers and sisters, tell me of examples of politicians before general election said this very loudly. None of them did. Doesn't matter if they're Labour, Conservative, or anybody else, because the environment was engineered, and these politicians operated within that environment. It was not politically, they had no political incentive to work for a fair society for Muslims. That's the honest truth.
Okay, inshallah. We'll take the last two, I think, and we'll have to cut off now because we're over our time. Does Prevent provide economic incentives to quote unquote snitches within masjids and Muslim community groups? If so, any way of making this transparent and known?
Yes, excellent question. They do provide money, funding. Some of it is direct funding. All right. In the early years, it was direct. It was labeled Prevent, and many Muslims took that money, including masjids and Islamic organizations and others. They also provide funding, which is not labeled Prevent. So you have to watch out. You have to know what you're looking for. Some of it is called Building Stronger Britain Together or something like that. But actually, it's Prevent funding. So in addition, what they do, they provide in-kind funding. And you have to read a report that Cage published. It's called We Are Not Independent. Hang on. I may have got the title wrong. We are not completely independent. If you go on our site, you'll find that report. We have documented the actual groups who took funding in kind, some of them, and some of them directly from counterterrorism branch. And they carried out activities in the Muslim community, deceiving Muslims about the true nature of that work. Okay, so yes, and that is still going to happen. We have to realize that oppressors, they'll always look for people within the oppressed community to buy out with their money. So why do you think it's going to be different for Muslims? They'll always exist, and we've got to smoke them out, basically.
The report was called We Are Completely Independent, the Home Office, Breakthrough Media, and the Prevent Counter Narrative Industry.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, have a look.
And we'll take this as a last question, inshallah. Do we need more funding in the Muslim media to enable the wave of influences for Muslims? It will be a trickle versus the Daily Mail, Fox News, but at least as a start, we give much to other charities, but surely this is important.
So should we have more funding in Muslim media to influence Muslims? I think the media strategy needs 2 or 3 major aspects. One is reaching Muslim communities. And in my opinion, the best way is actually social media, because you can actually directly connect with people and create your own communities within a bubble, basically. That's one strategy. The other strategy is in the mainstream, we have to have Muslim voices that represent our perspective. And those voices need to be strong and robust. They need to be very well versed in the arguments, and we have many Muslims like that. Those Muslims, those voices need to be resilient people, because the media establishment, when it doesn't like you, it's going to come after you. and you don't have to be a Muslim. Your name could be Jeremy or Corbyn, and you're gonna get done if you don't go with the media establishment narrative. But Muslims need to be brave, they need to be intelligent, and we need to produce those Muslims that go into mainstream media to argue the case, so that well-minded, fair people can actually hear our argument. And then thirdly, we do need to create our own platforms. That's important as well, although I don't think that's the most effective. I think we just need our voice in the mainstream.
Khair, inshallah. With that, inshallah, we'll conclude today's session, inshallah. Jazakallah, Brother Rabbani, for giving your time and giving us very valuable information for parents.
Jazakumullah khair. I appreciate that, and thank you for having me here. I just invite everybody to go to our website, especially if you have any problems or struggles, then we have a helpline there. It's on the top of our website. You can call that anytime, inshallah.
Okay, inshallah.
Jazakumullah khair.
With all other parents who are online, you can join the WhatsApp groups if you haven't already. The links are there for the mothers and the fathers group. Inshallah, the recording of today's session will be shared there. And will it be possible to get the slides from yourself?
Yeah, I can send that, inshallah, to you.
The slides, inshallah, I'll be able to also share the slides within the WhatsApp groups, inshallah. So we'll end it here for today. Jazakallah for everybody attending, and again, Brother Rabbani. And we'll finish it today. Subhanakallahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.